The smell of a life packed away is a unique, heartbreaking thing. It's not just the sharp chemical scent of cardboard boxes and packing tape. It's the smell of dust settling on things that were once touched daily, the faint papery scent of old books, and the ghost of a person's chosen fragrance. In this case, his. A mix of cheap sandalwood aftershave and instant coffee. For Maya, it was the smell of failure, her failure and his. It had been 4 months since her father, Rohan, had died. A sudden, massive heart attack at 58, alone in this very apartment. He was found 2 days later by the landlord, who had come to ask about the rent. That detail was the one that stuck in Maya's throat like a fishhook, the one that woke her up at 3 a.m. Not just that he was gone, but that he had died alone, waiting for a knock about an overdue bill. Maya, a 28-year-old junior architect, lived a life of clean lines, 90-degree angles, and client presentations. Her world was built on blueprints, on solid foundations. Rohan's world, this small, cluttered one-bedroom apartment, was built on stacks of yellowing paper, half-finished projects, and a skyline of empty mugs. He was a man of grand, beautiful, unfinished sentences. A part-time journalist, a full-time dreamer, and, in the financial ledger of the world, a failure. She had loved him, desperately. But she had also been so angry with him, angry at his unreliability, his big break that was always just around the corner, his inability to just be normal. She was the one who had to be the adult, even as a child. Now, she was his sole executor, which was a grim joke. There was nothing to execute, just this stuff. She'd cleared the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom. All that was left was his office, which was just a corner of the living room. It consisted of a rickety desk, a chair whose squeak she could remember from her childhood, and his technology. It was, like him, a relic. There was a newer, basic tablet the landlord had given him, but the main event was the laptop. It was an ancient, heavy black Dell Inspiron from at least 15 years ago, a brick. Maya ran her fingers over the dusty lid, the plastic worn smooth. She hadn't seen him use this thing in years. Why had he kept it? Beside it was a tangled nest of cables. With a sigh, she located the power brick, as big as her hand, and plugged it in. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. Maybe a will he'd never mentioned, a bank account she didn't know about, a final, unfinished novel that would explain everything. She pressed the power button. Nothing. She pressed it again, holding it down. With a wheeze and a groan, a fan inside the machine whirred to life, rattling like a death row inmate taking a final breath. The screen flickered, and then, impossibly, it lit up. The boot-up sound of Windows 7, a chime she hadn't heard in a decade, filled the silent apartment. It was so jarringly cheerful that Maya flinched. It was a sound from a different life. The desktop appeared, and she let out a small, choked laugh. It was him, a complete digital mess. The background was a low-resolution, default Windows wallpaper of a green hill. The screen was littered with icons, dozens of untitled new text document files, folders named Book Idea 2, Final Novel, Real One. Her heart ached. He was always about to do it. She saw a program icon, an old light blue envelope, Thunderbird Mail, a free email client. Her hand, sleek and modern with its slim silver rings, looked alien on the clunky yellowed plastic mouse. She clicked. The program opened, downloading 4 months of spam. Viagra, schools in your area. You've won. It was a sad digital echo of a life unlived. She looked at the inbox. Nothing but junk. She looked at the sent folder. Empty. Of course. He never called. He never wrote. He was a black hole of communication. The frustration she'd felt when he was alive flared up again, hot and familiar. You couldn't even send an email, Dad, she whispered to the dusty screen. She was about to close it, to just pull the plug and send the whole desk to an e-waste dump. But her mouse, moving across the screen, hovered over the drafts folder, and next to it, a number, 54. Her breath caught. 54. He'd never sent an email, but he'd started 54 of them. Her heart was hammering now. This felt wrong. This felt like prying. This was his private space. But he was gone, and she was so empty. She needed something, a piece of him that wasn't just a memory of his failures. She clicked. A list of emails populated the screen. They were all addressed to her. Maya Findlay. The subjects were a chaotic jumble of dates and random titles. Her eyes scanned down, and she stopped at one near the bottom. To Maya Findlay. Maya.Findlay@gmail.com. Subject, your graduation day speech, the one I didn't give. Date, June 18th, 2017. Her university graduation. She remembered that day. He'd been there, in a rumpled suit that smelled of mothballs. He'd clapped, given her a clumsy, one-armed hug, and then stood silently at the back during the family reception, drinking too much of the free, cheap, sparkling wine. She'd been so embarrassed, so desperate for him to just say something, to say he was proud. He'd just nodded and said, "Well done, kiddo. Big world out there." Her hand was shaking. She double-clicked the draft. The email opened. "My dearest Maya, I'm sitting at the back of the hall. You can't see me. You're up there, with your friends. Your cap is slightly crooked, and you keep trying to fix it without anyone noticing. I notice. I'm writing this on my phone, which is why the typing is probably terrible. I'll fix it when I get home on the old Dell. They just called your name. Maya Findlay, Bachelor of Architecture with honors. You walked across that stage, Maya, and you were like a lightning bolt. You were all sharp edges and sunlight and purpose. You looked like you belonged there. And I'm sitting here, your father, in a suit I borrowed from a friend, and I've never felt so proud, and I've never felt so small. I wanted to run up there. I wanted to yell, 'That's my daughter.' She did that. She built that. But I couldn't, because the whole time I was thinking about all the things I haven't done, the books I haven't finished, the rent I'm late on. You're a building, Maya, solid and real and going up, up, up. And I'm just the messy blueprint. The first idea, crumpled up in a ball. I wanted to tell you that your success isn't despite me. It's because of you. You saw this messy, chaotic life I lived, and you chose to build something clean and strong and permanent. You are the best thing I ever had a hand in creating. I'm so proud of you. I can't say this. My voice will crack. I'll make a fool of myself, and I know how much you hate that. So I'm writing it here, and maybe one day I'll be brave enough to send it. I love you, kiddo. Now go. The world is waiting for you to build on it. Dad." Maya was no longer sitting. She was on her knees on the dusty carpet, her forehead pressed against the sharp edge of the desk. She was not just crying. She was gasping. A raw, ugly sound that tore out of her. He'd seen her. He'd seen her cap was crooked, He'd noticed, this entire time, for 10 years, she had carried the memory of that day as proof of his indifference. And he had been sitting in the back, writing this. You were all sharp edges in sunlight. He had seen her more clearly than anyone, and he'd hidden it. You idiot, she wept into the floor. You stupid, beautiful idiot. Why didn't you send it? Why? It took her 15 minutes to get back into the chair. Her face was blotchy, her hands numb. She wiped her eyes on the sleeve of her designer jacket, smearing dust and mascara. She looked at the screen, the list. 53. More. This wasn't just a list. It was a life. It was her life, seen through his eyes. She scrolled, her hand now steady, driven by a new, desperate hunger. She had to know. She had to know all of it. She found another. 2. Maya Finlay. Subject. Our fight. The big one. Date. September 4th, 2021. The big one. She knew exactly which one he meant. It was just after she'd gotten her promotion. She'd come to his apartment to celebrate, and had found an eviction notice taped to his door. She'd screamed at him. She'd used words she'd never used before. She'd called his writing a stupid, pathetic hobby. She'd called him a leech. She'd thrown her new, expensive handbag on his couch and said, "Is this what you want? For me to just pay for you? To be your retirement plan?" He hadn't yelled back. That was the worst part. He'd just shrunk. He'd looked at her, his eyes wide and wounded, and said, "I'm sorry, Maya." "You're right." She'd left, slamming the door, and they hadn't spoken for 2 months. It was the longest they'd ever gone. She clicked the draft. "Maya, you left your bag. It's on the couch. It's a very nice bag. You've done so well. I'm not writing this to argue. You were right. You were right about all of it. The money, the hobby, the leech. You're not my retirement plan, Maya. You were never supposed to be. You were supposed to be the opposite. You were supposed to fly so high that you'd forget all about this grubby little apartment and your mess of a father. But I need to explain one thing. Not excuse it. Just explain. You called my dreams a hobby. You're probably right. But you don't know what it's like to be haunted. I'm haunted, Maya. By words. By stories. By the idea that if I could just get them in the right order, the world would finally make sense. That I would finally make sense. It's not an excuse for not paying the bills. It's just the truth. All my life, I've had 2 things that felt truly, breathtakingly real. 2 things that weren't just smoke. The first was the feeling of a story, the idea of it, pure and perfect in my head. The second was you. The tragedy of my life, my great, stupid failure, is that I could never hold on to either of them properly. The stories would break apart when I tried to write them down. And you grew up. You grew up and away from me. And you were right to. I'm so sorry I made you feel responsible for me. You're not. You're my daughter. And my God, I love you. Even when you're yelling at me. Especially then. You're fire. That's your mother. But the words, I like to think you got those from me. You just knew how to build with them. I only ever knew how to dream. I'll get the money. I'll sell the old watch. Don't worry. Please come and get your bag. The apartment feels even emptier without a piece of you in it. Dad, Maya let the email stay open. She didn't cry this time. She just felt a profound, hollowing cold. The cold of regret. He'd sold the watch, his father's watch. She'd seen it was gone, but she'd never asked. She'd just assumed he'd pawned it for rent, and she'd felt a bitter, self-righteous anger. He'd sold it to cover the rent. She'd shamed him about, and then he'd just let her believe he was a leech. I'm sorry, she whispered to the glowing screen. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. She was no longer an architect executing a will. She was an archaeologist. She was unearthing a man she'd lived with her entire life, but had never, ever known. She scrolled through the list. Your first day of high school. That boy, what's his name? On your 25th birthday. She had to read them all. She had to put him back together, piece by piece. Her eyes landed on the very last draft, the one at the top of the list. Its date was 4 months ago, 3 days before he was found. To Maya Finlay. Subject, Maya. Date, October 10th, 2024. Just her name. A cold, sharp fear, more potent than any grief, seized her. This was it. This was the last one, the one he was writing just before he... She looked at the preview text. It was short, just a few lines. Her hand hovered over the mouse, her entire life, her entire understanding of the man who had given her that life, balanced on the tip of her finger. She was terrified of what it would say, terrified that after all this it would be nothing, an unfinished sentence. But she had to know. She took a deep, ragged breath, and she clicked. End of part 1. Her hand trembled over the mouse, the plastic of the old device clicking loudly in the silent, dimming apartment. Subject, Maya. Date, October 10th, 2024. 3 days before he was found. 3 days before the landlord had come to ask about the rent. She clicked. The screen flickered, loading the message. It wasn't like the others. They were floods of text, entire paragraphs of emotion, confessions, and philosophies, tumbling out of him. This was sparse. Just a few short lines, sitting in the middle of the vast, white, digital emptiness. To Maya Finlay, maya.finlay@gmail.com. Subject, Maya. Thanks for the phone call, kiddo. It was good to hear your voice. I know you were busy. I could hear it. People talking in the background. Keyboards clicking. The Finlay presentation. Sounds important. Your name. You asked, Dad, is everything okay? I'm just running into a meeting. I said, Yep, all good. We'll talk later. But I wanted to tell you. I wanted to say I'm proud of you. Watching you build a world that's so important, where people stop to listen to you. It's really something. You've still got that fire in your voice, Maya. Just wanted to say that. And I was remembering that story. When you were 6, and you drew an entire city on the apartment wall. Green crayon. Your mother was furious, but I just kept staring at it. You'd drawn doors, and windows, and a flower in every single window. You were always a builder, kiddo. And that was it. The words just stopped. The cursor, a small, blinking vertical line that had been waiting patiently for 15 years, was now, and forever, still. It was frozen after the word, just. An unfinished sentence, an unfinished breath. Maya stared at the screen. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. Her mind, her sharp architect's mind that thought in clean lines, 90-degree angles, and structural integrity, simply shattered. This wasn't a letter. It was a photograph of his last moment on Earth. She remembered the phone call. She remembered it with a sudden, searing clarity that burned her from the inside out. She had been busy. The Finlay presentation. It was her first major solo project. She had been at her desk, surrounded by blueprints, her phone buzzing. She saw Dad and had squeezed her eyes shut. Not now, please. She had picked up, her voice already sharp with stress. "Hi, Dad. Is everything okay?" "I'm just running into a meeting." It was a lie. She wasn't running into a meeting, not for another hour, but she was busy. She was important. "Yep, all good," he'd said. His voice sounded thin. "We'll talk later." She'd hung up and hadn't thought about it again. And her father, on the other end, alone in his cluttered apartment, had heard that rushed, stressed energy and had interpreted it as fire. He had translated her impatience as purpose. He had taken her dismissal and turned it into something he could be proud of. And the crayon. She remembered the wall. Her mother, gone now for so long, had been furious. A storm of ruined drywall and lost deposits. But Rohan had just stared at it. He'd gotten on his knees, his chin level with her 6-year-old eyes, and said, "It's not a mess, Alara. She's not making a mess. She's building a world. Look, this one has a garden on the roof." He had always seen it. He had always known. As he was typing that, his fingers on this very keyboard, that's when it must have happened. That's when his heart, which he had poured out into 54 unsent messages, had finally, quietly given up. His last thought, his last unfinished word, was for her. She had been with him, in that room, on that screen, without knowing it. A sound tore out of her that she had never heard before. It wasn't a scream of anger or sadness. It was a raw, guttural wail of a truth found 4 months too late. "What, Dad?" She screamed at the laptop, her voice cracking in the empty room. "What were you just... Please, finish it. Finish the sentence." But the screen was silent. The 15-year-old laptop fan whirred, its only reply. The cursor was permanently still. She sat there. For hours, the room went dark. The glow of the old Windows 7 desktop was the only light, illuminating her tear-streaked, hollowed-out face. She had read them all. She had consumed a life. The man she had dismissed. The man she had loved but been so ashamed of. The man she had called a failure. He wasn't a failure. He was a writer. A towering, brilliant, heartbreaking poet. He just had an audience of one, and he had left all his words, his entire soul, in the drafts. "Why?" she whispered to the glowing screen, the question that had haunted her. "Why didn't you just send them? Why would you write all this and not send it?" And then, looking at the 54 drafts, at his confessions of failure, at his pride in her success, at his last unfinished word, she understood. He was afraid. He was afraid at her graduation to admit his suit was borrowed. He was afraid after their fight to admit she had broken him. He was afraid to tell her that her fire made him proud, in case she thought he was asking for money. He was a man of crumpled blueprints, and she was his finished steel and glass skyscraper. How could the blueprint ever dare to speak to the building? He was afraid that the truth of him, his poverty, his unfinished books, his profound, beautiful, messy soul, would make him even smaller in her successful, architect-designed eyes. So he wrote. Writing was safe. He had locked his entire heart in these 54 digital files, a time capsule he never intended to send, but couldn't bear to delete. Maya wiped her tears, her sleeve coming away black with mascara and dust. Her face was hard now, set with a new, sharp purpose. She looked at the folder list, sent 0, drafts, 54. Her hand went to the mouse. She clicked the first draft, your first day of high school. She scrolled to the top, held down the shift key, and clicked the last, subject, Maya, 54 items selected. Her hand moved toward the delete button. Erase it all. Near the bottom, an option, grayed out but functional. Print. She clicked it. Her father's ancient beige printer, which hadn't been touched in what looked like a decade, gave a deep groan. It shuddered. It rattled. But with a mechanical whine, it whirred to life and pulled in a single sheet of paper from its dusty tray. And then, slowly, agonizingly, line by line, the first email began to appear. The dot matrix buzz filling the silence. My dearest Maya, I'm sitting at the back of the hall. You can't see me. Maya reached out and took the sheet. The paper was still warm from the fuser. The sharp, acrid smell of toner and old dust filled the air, mingling with the phantom scent of sandalwood and coffee. It was his voice. Finally, tangible and real. 3 weeks later. Epilogue. Maya's apartment was the same. Clean lines, white walls, minimalist, expensive furniture. Everything was perfect. But she was different. The silence in her clean, white apartment no longer felt like control. It felt empty, lacking. On her glass and steel coffee table, there was a new object. It was the only object that didn't fit her aesthetic. It was thick and heavy and real. It was a book. She had taken the 54 printed drafts to a professional bookbinder. The cover was simple, heavy black cardstock, and in the center, in Maya's own beautiful architectural handwriting, was a title in white ink. The Drafts. Rohan Finlay. She had printed every single email, every unfinished thought, every I love you that was never sent. The very last page was the unfinished one. She hadn't thrown the old laptop away. It was stored safely under her desk, a silent, sleeping oracle. She picked up the book. She ran her fingers over the embossed title. The smell of the paper was now a permanent part of her home. Maya wasn't angry at her father anymore. She wasn't ashamed. She understood. He wasn't a failure. He was a writer who had spent his entire life working on a single brilliant masterpiece, an epistolary novel dedicated to his only reader. And this book, this was the proof, her father had told her, in his beautiful, tragic words. You're a building, Maya. Solid and real. And I'm just the messy blueprint. Maya held the book to her chest, a single clear tear tracing a path down her cheek. You weren't the blueprint, Dad, she whispered to the quiet listening room. You were the foundation.